like I said, put some questions in the chat, put a comment in the chat, and then we'll definitely have some time after he's done for questions, okay? All right, thank you, Muhi, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tim, and everyone at AFP Western Pennsylvania. Really excited to be spending time with you. Would have loved to be there in person back in April, but as the world turns, so do we. And, you know, I wanted to start off by saying, just recognizing the challenging times that we are in, everything from racial justice to COVID-19 to just economic times. Really thankful to have this platform and opportunity to share a little bit more about Islam and philanthropy, and about myself as well. So I am the child of immigrants who came from India and Pakistan back in the 70s. And I wholly believe and support the fact that they were able to do so because of the civil rights movement. And really believe that my ability to achieve my American dream and my parents to achieve their American dream, as convoluted as that statement is a direct result of the Civil Rights Act of 1965. So just wanted to start off with that sentiment and really showcase the longstanding history of Islam in America through the Black community as well. So that being said, just wanted to share a little bit more about myself. So I, as Tim mentioned, am the co-founder of the American Muslim Community Foundation. Started that organization in 2016 to work on this space of Muslim philanthropy and really not recreate the wheel, but start something new. And prior to that, I worked for 5 years as a major gift officer at the American Red Cross here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Before that, I worked at a small religious nonprofit that had a national focus, but primarily in the Bay Area and Chicago community called Tetleaf Collective. Prior to that, I worked at a think tank focusing on American Muslim research called the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. And both at Tetleaf and at ISPU, I was a one-person development team. So I'm sure many of you have been in that situation where you're leading the strategy, inputting the data, depositing checks, doing everything in between to build an annual fund, establish a CRM, all of those basics that a nonprofit needs to have a fully functioning development team. So I was that person for both ISPU and Tetleaf, and really found a lot of value in my membership at AFP through that time. Really was able to rely on AFP as a resource, went to the international conferences, went to regional things when I was in Michigan and here in California. So I love AFP, and that's been a really good part of my professional development. So prior to ISPU and kind of where everything started, I was a student at the University of Michigan Dearborn and had an internship with the Office of University Development in our University of Michigan Ann Arbor, and had an internship there where we studied once a week in what the basics of philanthropy are. But the other 4 days of the week, we actually worked in a department learning development best practices from the university. We got to see firsthand how 500 staff members fundraised capital campaigns, worked on annual funds, invited the athletics department to participate in fundraising, or the university hospital. So it was an all-inclusive 360 view of what it takes to fundraise at a university. And in the photo and in the video you just saw, my dog Atlas, we have a cat Ninja, and that's my wife Natalie. So that's a little bit about me, and we'll jump into the topic at hand. So Islam is as simple as you want it to be, in the sense that to be a Muslim, you need to state the testimony of faith, as we call the Shahada. And if you say those words and you believe those words, at the minimum, we consider anybody who follows that a Muslim. So I want everybody to repeat after me. Just kidding. But essentially what it says is that if you believe in God and that there is one God, and that you believe that the Prophet Muhammad is the last messenger of all the prophets, then you are Muslim. And then in addition to that, as people go on their spiritual journey, there is the fact that the 5 pillars of faith. So first with the testimony that we just talked about, then there is expectation and requirement of praying 5 times a day. One at sunrise, one at midday, one in the late afternoon, one at sunset, and one at night. And then there's almsgiving, which many of us are familiar with. And whether it's tithing in Christianity or Sadaqa in the Jewish faith, in Islam, there are 2 versions. One is called Zakat, and one is called Sadaqa. So this almsgiving is in reference to Zakat. The Zakat is a pillar of the faith. It's a requirement. We'll get into how to calculate it and other resources in a little bit. But essentially, it is 2.5% of your cumulative wealth that you distribute annually. And the only people who are required to give Zakat are those that have a savings of more than the equal value of 3 ounces of gold. So we'll get into a little bit of that later. But if you don't have that equal value of 3 ounces of gold, then you're actually eligible to receive Zakat. And there are certain categories of people who are eligible, of who can receive Zakat as well. Many of you are probably familiar with Ramadan. We actually just wrapped up Ramadan in late May. It's on a lunar calendar, so it shifts about 10 days each year. You fast from sunrise to sundown. You can't have any coffee or water. You abstain from having marital relations. You abstain from trying to speak ill of other people. So it's a lot about your actions as well. And you do that for the whole month of Ramadan. Again, after sunset, you can have everything you want, but it also is a test of your mental strength, of your physical strength, and just you're often very reflective in that time period of Ramadan. And then the last one being the pilgrimage or Hajj. And this year, due to COVID-19, the Saudi Arabian government has decided to limit the number of participants and really keeping it to only people who live locally. And they're trying to have people from all different nationalities participate. But in a normal year, there are millions of people who participate in the Hajj ritual. But it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out later this year. So those are the pillars of faith. And for the articles of belief, this is that we are a monotheistic faith, that there is one God. We believe in all the prophets from the beginning of time, whether it's Adam, Noah, Jesus, Abraham, Muhammad, all of the prophets from start to finish. We believe that each generation of mankind had a prophet up until the Prophet Muhammad. And in the Quran itself, there's over 20 prophets listed as well. And we believe that there were 5 of them who were messengers who actually brought divine books. And then we believe in the Day of Judgment, that will be held accountable for all of our actions. We believe that there are angels as God's creation. And we believe that fate has been predetermined by God in the beginning of time, that he wrote everything, but we have our individual will to do what we want. It's just that God is all-knowing and that he has that predicted for us. So although we have free will and choice and everything in what we do, and that's what separates us from other beings like animals and whatnot, but we are able to control our own fate in that regard. So this is just a very preliminary Islam 101, but wanted to share some of that context with you as we move forward. So I started out by talking about the longstanding history of Islam in America. And the gentleman on the left, his name is Umar ibn Said. And he was brought from the western shores of Africa in the 1700s. And his autobiography that he wrote was in Arabic. And he himself referenced verses from the Quran in that autobiography. And since people couldn't understand him, and since he was speaking Arabic, they thought he was a lunatic, that he was just mumbling, but he was actually a well-versed scholar of his time. And this is an example of the fact that up to 1/3 of slaves were Muslim. And since the beginning generation of America, Muslims have been involved since day one. So that's something that I like to highlight and share. And there are also stories of the fact that although they may have been stripped of their dignity, they held on to their faith. And that there are classical examples of people passing on what were called Sadaqa cakes. And in the example of giving Sadaqa, of giving a gift or giving a charity to other people, that was a prime example of how they still practice their faith. Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb, the gentleman on the right, he was a U.S. consul to the Philippines, I believe. Again, back in the early ages, he was one of the first known converts to Islam, and he was in charge of the World Fair at that time as well. So these are two very early examples, and you can find this history of Islam in America through a project that Harvard's done, and there's also a documentary that's being filmed and created now that should be released in the next few years, I think 2021, 2022, about Islam in America as well. So another interesting fact is that in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was the first purpose-built mosque. I had the pleasure of doing a cross-country road trip from California to Michigan and stopped by that mosque to see it in person and pray there. And it's really a beautiful thing to see the long-standing history of Islam here. It comes with its challenges, of course. And in the example of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Betty Shabazz, the family, you know, these are icons in the Black community. These are icons in the Muslim community. These are our royalty here in America. You know, a lot of respect and homage to the hard work and the sacrifices that the Black community has made in response to civil rights, in response to religious freedom, in response to just demanding equality. And we obviously see those challenges today, decades later. So to break down who the American Muslim community is, there's research done by Pew Research Group in 2018. And there's also research done by the by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, where I had worked. So ISPU has a lot of great research on the American Muslim community. And again, Pew Research has done a lot of research as well. So the breakdown is that 34% are South Asian, that 26% are Arab, that 25% are Black, that 9% are white and or mixed, and that a growing percentage that we see is 6% Hispanic. So as we know it, I think the stats say by 2050, the United States will be a majority non-white. And you see this trend in the Muslim community in America as well, that there's no significant one majority. It's a lot of minorities built up. And with there being over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, you know, there's a lot of diversity in that. It's not that all of them are lumped into the Middle East like some may think. They're widespread across the entire world, and you'll find Muslims in every country. And they may look different, they may practice differently. That was one of the beautiful things that Malcolm X identified after he embraced Islam and went on the Hajj, he saw the humanity of Islam reflected in all the people that he met. So some more stats on the socioeconomic and political power of the Muslim community. There are rough estimates that there are up to, if not more than 1 million, 1.5 million registered Muslim voters. There are over 2,000 mosques in America, obviously nonprofit organizations, and a lot of them have been built in the last decade as well. So there's been an increasing expansion of mosques being built. There are over 300 Muslim schools with over 40,000 students. And of course, this can be part-time, weekend, or full-time schools as well. And just by looking at GuideStar and IRS and other sources, there are over 5,500 nonprofit organizations registered as Islamic-based. The American Muslim community has a disposable income of $124 billion. There are, at a minimum, 3.75 million Muslims in America, about 1% of the population. And an interesting fact is that Muslims are the second largest non-Christian group in 20 states across the country. So again, like a lot of immigrants in the early 1900s moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and built a community there. And when you're thinking about Islam in America, you wouldn't necessarily think that Iowa has such a large population of Muslims. But also looking at the list, South Dakota or even North Dakota, it's really interesting to see the widespread Muslim community across the country. So I should have probably updated this slide because the 2019 numbers just came out from Giving USA. So we know that giving in 2019 was just at $449.6 billion. So rounding up to 450 billion. But we'll focus on the 2018 data since that's what's here in the slide. And a lot of you have researched this, you know these numbers like the back of your hands. But a majority of giving comes from individuals through bequests, foundations, and about 95%. And that number still held true for 2019 in the percentage-wise. And religion and education were still in the top 2 for 2019 as well. But what we're hoping to identify is if Muslims are 1% of the population here in the United States, are Muslims giving and contributing 1% of this amount? It's hard to say that Muslims are giving $4.2 or $4.5 billion, but I'm determined through the resources that I have and the work that I'm doing through the American Muslim Community Foundation to kind of keep track of that as well. So ISPU, like I said, they did do a research on Muslim philanthropy that American Muslim Community Foundation was proud to sponsor. And the general sentiment of why Muslims give is that the feelings that those with more should help those with less. And this was the primary factor that motivated Muslim giving. The second was a sense of religious duty and obligation, and then similar sentiments with other religious communities and the general public, that giving makes me feel good, and giving can make a change or bring about a desired impact. So you can go to ispu.org and look for the Muslim Philanthropy Study and take a look at all of the results that are there. So breaking down Zakat, again, we talked about Zakat being 2.5% of your cumulative wealth annually. There's a great calculator online called zakat.fyi, and again, that's zakat.fyi. And if you go to that website, it'll help you calculate what you would owe should you participate in giving Zakat. So even if you were just curious and not even intending to participate, you would enter in your assets, you would enter in your balances. If you have a home and don't own it outright, like you still have a mortgage payment, you don't need to include that. Similar to a car, if it's your primary vehicle, you don't need to include that. But if you had extra vehicles or if you had a rental property income, those are things that you would include. And then similar, like the debts, student loans could count towards that. But then you use that information, you plug it in, whether you add in your 401k, you add in any stocks that you own. And after all of that, you then determine what 2.5% on that amount would be. And the 3 ounces of gold is the minimum amount of wealth, what we call the nisab. And if you have more than the nisab, that is the amount that you will owe in paying zakat. So I know it's a little complex, but that is the practice that a majority of Muslims follow every year. Many of them like to calculate their zakat in Ramadan, but then they'll distribute it throughout the year, or some of them will actually give it in Ramadan as well because of the increased blessings of doing acts of good in Ramadan. But as Muslims, we believe that our intentions are what we are valued on as well. So if you make the intention of calculating your zakat in Ramadan, but then distributing it throughout the rest of the year, you will still receive the reward of doing so in Ramadan as well. So that being said, zakat can be used for 8 different categories that are outlined in the Quran. And it states people who are in need can be of benefit of zakat, people who are destitute, people who are collectors or administrators of zakat, people who have embraced Islam or are allies of the Muslim community, people who are stranded as travelers and may not have a place to stay or eat, people who you can use zakat to free people from bondage, from bail, from slavery. You can use zakat for the benefit of Islam itself, and you can use zakat to pay off other people's debt. So when you're calculating your zakat and determining who can actually receive it, it shouldn't be your immediate family members. Like, I can't give my zakat to my wife or to my brother or to my sister, or my parents can't give their zakat to me, because that is their general obligation to take care of your family anyways. But if it is a cousin, if it is a relative, if it is somebody in your local community, a friend, or a lot of people may decide that they want to give to the countries back home where they immigrated from. Those are all okay. There's differences of opinion on whether you should start locally and then act globally. But there's other arguments that it should be where the need is greatest. So whether there's an international crisis or disaster relief or a war-torn country, there's a lot of different ways in which you can decide who should get your zakat first. So we talked about Sadaqa being the other form of charity or almsgiving. Sadaqa, everybody can participate in it, but zakat is very specific for those categories that I just described and for the people who have the capacity to give zakat. But everybody can participate in Sadaqa. And a lot of countries had established endowments for universities, such as Fatima Fihri, and she established the Qarawin in Morocco, one of the longest standing universities in the world. And she used her wealth to establish an endowment for that university. So one of the first examples of this being done as well. And then similarly, governments may set up endowments to provide all of the services, social services and basic needs for a community. So there's a long-standing history of this in Islam and countries that are predominantly Muslim majority as well. So Sadaqa can provide ongoing gifts and rewards to people who participate. When people are doing planned giving, Muslims can leave up to 1/3 of your estate to charitable giving. And the reason why it's maxed at 1/3 is because the other 2/3 goes to your family and your kin and people who are related to you, and have those rights over you. And again, Sadaqa can be in the form of a smile, as our teachings teach us. And it can be in the form of moving something that is blocking a path along the way, like a stick or a rock that somebody may trip over. Removing that from a path is a form of charity. And saying a kind word is a form of charity. So Sadaqa is beyond a financial commitment. It's more so your mannerisms and how you deal with people as well. So again, why did we start American Muslim Community Foundation? Back in 2016, I had left working in the Muslim community at Tetleaf and at ISPU, and I'd gotten my master's in nonprofit management, and through the years, I'd gotten my CFRE and my CFRM from Indiana University. But I wanted to still use my skill set for the Muslim community. So while I was at the Red Cross, I started thinking of like, what would be unique? What wouldn't be recreating the wheel? And I'm sure like most of you, our nonprofits in the Muslim community were very event centric. And what a time to be alive now where the whole game has changed, right? We have to think of different ways to fundraise. So in 2016, we started AMCF because we saw the vast growth of donor advised funds. We saw the ability of giving circles to make impact. And we wanted to help nonprofits become more sustainable in the long term and the short term. So primarily the services that AMCF provides are donor advised funds and giving circles for families. And then for nonprofit organizations, we do fiscal sponsorship and endowment services. So those are the primary services that AMCF provides. And to my knowledge, there's still no entity that exclusively provides this for the Muslim community. So that is why we started AMCF. And to date, we've given out more than $2.7 million to nonprofit organizations, and we're funding more than just the Muslim community. We've made gifts to AFP, we've made gifts to alma maters, and we work with over 80 families across the country to distribute their Sadaqa and their Zakat. So primarily, the donor advised funds are a bulk share of what we do. We do have grant cycles, and earlier this year, we had a grant cycle for census engagement in the Muslim community. We had a grant cycle for starting endowments, and then we had a grant cycle for COVID-19 response funds. And we also led initiatives for Black History Month, for Women's History Month, and now we have one for Black Lives Matter as well. So altogether, all of those initiatives and through the donor advised funds and grants, we've given out more than $2.7 million. So here are a few other organizations in the community that are in this philanthropy space. There's the Center on American Muslim Philanthropy. They work with Indiana University to provide all of their fundraising school and Lilly Family School of Philanthropy courses to the Muslim community exclusively to help more Muslim nonprofit leaders earn their CFRM. So it's a great initiative. I think they have over 500 people who've actually taken the courses and over 200 CFRMs now in the community, in the Muslim community, leading nonprofit organizations. LaunchGood is a platform like Kickstarter that is crowdfunding based, and for the Muslim community, they've raised over $100 million, and in Ramadan alone, several $1 million for charities all across the world. It's a global platform and a really great way to engage the Muslim community. Pillars is a giving circle at the Chicago Community Trust, and they work with families who give $25,000 or more. And they have, I believe, around like 20 to 30 families that participate in that. So they've been around longer, and we've really learned a lot with them to help expand this idea of Muslim philanthropy and best practices as well. Some of the larger nonprofits in the Muslim community, some that you may be familiar with, others that you're learning about. Helping Hand for Relief and Development does a lot of work internationally. Zakat Foundation of America as well. They do some US-based programming and distributions. Islamic Relief USA, they have a US grants program, and they also do a lot of work, and Syrian American Medical Society as well. All of them sponsor orphans, they do education work, they do healthcare work internationally, and they have some domestic US-based programs as well. And then in the top right, there's Zaytuna College, which is the first liberal arts college. It's based in Berkeley, California, right next to UC Berkeley and Graduate Theological Union. And they also have an endowment. Islamic Relief also has an endowment. And these are sizable, large Muslim nonprofits that raise multi-millions of dollars every year. So now I want to transition into things that you should consider when you're trying to engage and build with the Muslim community. Some of your donors may be Muslim, but it's hard to identify them without necessarily asking or polling or doing a survey. So those are things that you can do to help self-identify who Muslims are in your database. If you're trying to build authentic relationships with them, we'll get into that in the next few slides as well. But everybody has their own level of religiosity. Some may be Muslim by name, but not necessarily by practice. And vice versa as well. You may have somebody who doesn't have a Muslim sounding name, but they are Muslim. They could have been one of the long-standing Muslim families that converted to Islam in the 60s with the wave of the Nation of Islam and converting to a mainstream Islam like Malcolm X or Muhammad Ali. Or it could be that somebody like my wife, who converted to Islam and doesn't necessarily have a Muslim sounding name. So there's a lot of things to consider. And then a lot of times people's experience with Islam coming from other countries where maybe Islam was used as a political force and identity more than a religious one. So people have varying experiences with Islam as well. So these are all things to consider before necessarily just jumping to the conclusion that somebody's Muslim and you want to engage them because they're Muslim. So, you know, through the last several years, there have been attacks on the Muslim community. There have been the Muslim ban from the government. There have been so many examples where the Muslim community just feels vulnerable in these times. And in terms of building community and building confidence with the community, we hope that you and your nonprofit organizations focus on building bridges and not walls. The other thing that I mentioned as well is that a majority of Muslims give their charitable giving through Ramadan, and a majority of it in Ramadan. And that ISP study, one of the things that they found was that Muslims are just as likely to give to causes outside of the faith than they are within the faith as well. So, of course, the amount may differ that they give to a cause, but they're still just as likely to give. So that's something that's really key for you to highlight and understand as well. And just as you're building your strategy to engage your normal donors, all of those things will go a long way when you're building the relationship with the Muslim community as well. What I would encourage you to do is, this is a first great start, just getting a basic primer on Islam and philanthropy, but also ask a Muslim friend for advice. Many of you probably have a doctor or a friend that is Muslim. If you don't have a Muslim friend, find one, make one, reach out to me. I'm a resource here for you. And one of the things that may help, and of course with Ramadan now being in that April-May time period due to the lunar calendar, start thinking now, over the next 6 months, over the next year, how are you going to try to engage the Muslim community where you live? So, you know, try by starting to write a letter, whether it's an email or a physical letter, to the mosque on behalf of your organization. When restrictions open up, ask about visiting the mosque and going to a service. A lot of the communities do potlucks, and when those things open up again, or they do Friday night lectures. Those are great opportunities to engage and attend, and then ask to also present about your organization at those events too. Try to recruit a Muslim board member after you've done all of those steps, right? So these are kind of building off of one another. And then you can also take your research to the Foundation Center, to the IRS.gov site, to GuideStar, to really look at other organizations that are supporting or doing work with the Muslim community. And then make sure that this is about building bridges as well. If something in the local community happens, make sure you reach out to the Muslim community and let them know that you stand in solidarity with them. Even if it is something that happens nationally or globally, these are times to kind of wake up to all of the injustices around the world and identify with people who are part of that struggle as well. An easy way to identify who those people in the community are that are hyperactive is with the interfaith councils in your local community. So you might be able to identify who that active Muslim is in your local community based on joining an interfaith council. And then it's really about networking from there. So you ask that one person, can you introduce me to 2 or 3 other people who may be interested in the work that our organization does? And then from there, you can continue to expand your Muslim network within your local community. A lot of these larger cities across the country have regional councils of Muslim organizations. So for example, in Michigan, they have the Michigan Muslim Community Council. In Chicago, they have the Chicago Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, they have the Northern California Islamic Council. They have one in Southern California. They have some in Texas and Florida, and New York, and New Jersey, all across the country. I'm not too familiar with the Pennsylvania community, but I would imagine that there is a regional council of some sort that a lot of the mosques or nonprofit organizations participate in this regional council. And maybe they meet once a year, maybe they meet quarterly, but it's an opportunity for you to try to get in touch with them. The challenge often, and probably what Tim was relating to when he reached out to the local community, is that a lot of these organizations are volunteer-led. A lot of these organizations are short-staffed. A lot of these organizations don't have dedicated volunteers, right? The research shows that there's over 1 million nonprofit organizations, and a majority of them have budgets less than $250,000. And that's true in the Muslim community. And in addition to that, many of them only have, if not 1 to 2 staff members that are part-time or full-time. So all of these challenges come about, but hopefully if you find the right people, you find the go-getters, those are the people that will help connect you and make a difference. As I said, the Muslim community is hyper event centric. Again, a lot of that has changed in the last 3 months, but once things open up, or if there are online virtual galas, that would be an opportunity for you to attend a local Muslim organization's event online. And then we want you to also celebrate with us. Muslims have 2 main holidays at the end of Ramadan called Eid al-Fitr, and at the end of Hajj, or the pilgrimage, called Eid al-Adha. And these two holidays are about 3 months apart. So as we just finished Ramadan in the end of May, we celebrated Eid al-Fitr then. And then in about August timeframe, the Hajj season will be then. And at the end of that Hajj season is Eid al-Adha. So these are really great opportunities and a way for you to just write a card to your local mosque or write a card to Muslims that you know and say Happy Eid, Eid Mubarak. All of those things would go a long way in building relationships. So what I also like to share is that there are a lot of successful Muslims in the business and tech world. The CEO and founder of Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya, is Muslim. He's done a lot of work with refugees. The CEO of Edible Arrangements, Tariq Farid, is also Muslim. The CEO of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Shahid Khan, is Muslim. He got his start in automotive bumper business and kept on building his wealth that way. Some of the executives at PIMCO, I'm not sure, I believe he may have retired now. But then also Ethan Allen, Farouk Kathwari, the founder of that, is Muslim. And again, so many C-suite executives are Muslims, and they have capacity to give. So it's, again, aligning them with your cause. The basics that we learn in fundraising of linkage, ability, and interest, all of that's going to apply to the Muslim community as well. So it's about prospecting, it's about researching, it's about all of those basics and fine-tuning it for the Muslim community in your local area. So I see that there are a lot of questions coming through the chat. So I would like to come back to you guys and hopefully carry on the conversation there. So I see Jill mentioned, can you talk more about giving in Ramadan? And giving in Ramadan is one of those things that any deed or any act of good in Ramadan is, we consider, just multiplied in effect. I talked about intentionality, right? So if you have the intent to do something good, you get rewarded for just having the intention. If you carry through that act of good, then it's as if it was multiplied by 10. And here's the kicker. If you had an intent to do something wrong, but then didn't do it, you get a reward of a good deed. And if you had the intent of doing something wrong, and of course you go through with that action, you are then held accountable for that act. So similarly, in Ramadan, where everything is exponentially rewarded, it is understood that if you carry through with an act of good deed, whether it's giving money or helping somebody, those good deeds will be then further multiplied in Ramadan. And specifically speaking, the last 10 nights of Ramadan as well are where people try their hardest to be the most reflective, to be the most sincere, to be the most devout, to be the most giving. And in those last 10 nights, as I'm in this charitable giving space, a lot of the families that I work with will do a lot of their charitable giving in those 10 nights as well. And I see Dave shared the local chapter of CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations in Pittsburgh. Fantastic organization nationwide. They have a lot of chapters across the country doing great work to support the civil rights of Muslims and all Americans in general as well. They provide free legal services. So a very great organization that's been around for about 25, 30 years across the country. So definitely keep asking questions. Feel free to come off mic. I want to make this as engaging as possible. I know it's hard to just kind of listen for 40 minutes or so, but please do share your questions.
maybe I can, if it's okay, if I can expound a little bit. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for this information. I work at a university here in Pittsburgh
Mhm.
and have worked with a family, a Muslim family, for 14 years. So I know them well,
Yeah.
know their children, their parents. And I'm sorry to say, or maybe ashamed to say, that I've never acknowledged any of their religious traditions. I send them a holiday card at the holidays. So I'm feeling embarrassed. And I guess I'm seeking some advice whether it would be totally weird for me to have a conversation. I mean, I think this would be a really good starting point
Mhm.
to mention that I took this session and it was fascinating, and just have a conversation with them. You know, we've never talked about your religion, and I had another question typed in the chat, but you know, you mentioned Eid and sending a card, so that was kind of one of my questions. Um, they've been very generous and very philanthropic. Um, and I'm just wondering, you know, where to go,
Yeah.
if anywhere.
So, you know, it's one point is like your comfort level in the relationship. And it seems like over 14 years, you have a pretty good relationship with them. So even if it's, you know, looking up when Eid al-Adha will be, kind of in that August timeframe again, sending a generic card. You can use a Happy Holidays card. And even, you know, at the end of the year, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, totally fine. You know, my wife and we still celebrate Christmas because a lot of her family does. But I think we're kind of unique in that way, right? So I think making it relevant would be important. You know, send them the link to this webinar and be like, hey, I learned a lot of really great things. Would love to hear your ideas on how maybe we can build more relationships with the Muslim community at the university, right? Maybe there's a Muslim Students Association. Maybe there's dorms on campus and they don't have access to halal food, or they don't have access to a prayer space or something like that, that would speak really well to them. And if their kids have gone to the university or are about to go to the university, or if they're alumni, or if they have other families in the community that frequent your school, those are all things to build community. And, you know, it's good that you're acknowledging this. And you know, I don't want to say that you should feel sorry or you should feel embarrassed, but you're taking the right steps in the right direction. So, you know, thank you for being here today and kind of learning with us. That speaks a lot to your wanting to build community in that way.
Absolutely. And, you know, I guess I was raised Catholic, and you talked about the tenets of both of the giving philosophies in the Muslim community. We, you know, as a religion, and I'm not speaking for all Catholics, but you know, you're supposed to tithe, and I've always had the little cards that when I was a kid, you know, you put in the basket every year, every week, the collection basket. Do you feel that the philosophies that you've talked about giving back are practiced by the majority of Muslims?
Yeah, and again, similar to you, it's hard to speak on behalf of all Muslims, but I would say that of the 5 pillars of faith, my assumption would be that Ramadan is probably, fasting is probably up there. Prayer is probably up there as well. And then the Zakat, a lot of people do take very seriously. And it's interesting because of those 5 pillars, so many of them are congregational, right? Hajj, like everybody going to Mecca. Prayer, like praying together with other people. And when you take your shahada, a lot of times it's with other people as well. But the act of charity is often, there's a lot of I wouldn't say shyness, but maybe more so trying to be humble about it. And, you know, people don't necessarily talk a lot about that side, but we're trying to encourage those conversations. But what I will say is, like, a lot of the mosques, especially since COVID-19 has shut them down, have been losing out on those weekly gifts that people would just drop money into the bin, right? And especially through Ramadan, like I was saying, majority of organizations get their annual budgets in Ramadan itself, or a large majority of it. So the fact that mosques were closed put a lot of burden on small mosques, large mosques, mosques of all sizes. So it's interesting to see the generosity in the community come out. And I've seen some of these families that I work with send tens of thousands of dollars to their local mosque. And specifically for the COVID-19 response fund that we had, we distributed $350,000 in the month of May to mosques and small nonprofits. CARE Pennsylvania was one of those that received some funding from us. So I would like to think that charitable giving is one of the highly participated practices of the faith.
Other questions?
Muhi, I thought you had lots of fascinating information, and it was a lot to digest in one go at it, because most of all of this is new to me. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, and I hope to add you to my team of people that I will reach out to while I build some new Islamic partners in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to put my information up again real quick too. So feel free to jot it down, share it out, find me on LinkedIn. I'll put that in the chat as well. And really, I'm here as a resource for you. I want to hear about your plans to engage the Muslim community. Feel free to bounce ideas off of me before you send something out. So, yeah.
That's a great idea.
And for, good, Dave.
Yeah, I was going to ask a quick question. With, you gave some great resources. Are there books or great, like, written things that are good for us to read regarding learning more about Islamic philanthropy?
Yeah, so the Center on Muslim Philanthropy that I mentioned, they publish a journal every year through Indiana University. And that might be a good start. It's definitely academic, so it's not like a super exciting read, but it's at least thoughtful in their research. Some of those people who are affiliated with Indiana University have also written books on the Muslim nonprofit sector. But again, it's very fresh. And there hasn't been much, but IU is pumping out a lot of great research in this area.
Great. Thanks.
I would encourage any of you to reach out to the Islamic Community Center that is kind of Oaklandish. I know they get a lot of university students there that do stuff, but one of our fellow board members, Adele, who oversees programming, and I met with some of their staff and because they have a strong interest in fundraising, learning how to fundraise. So our AFP chapter will actually be working with them just on that. That's kind of what sparked this program. But I think due to them being closed and some other things, they couldn't join us today. But if you're interested or you just want to talk to somebody, I would suggest you reach out to them. Their board president is just a wonderful gentleman, and their other staff. They were very welcoming for Adele and I to come in and learn about them, and gave us a great tour of the mosque. They tried to feed us 1,000 times, which I think that's just the hospitality level, right? But I can't tell you how many, the 2 hours we were there, how many times they asked us if we wanted food. But it was a really great experience to really see that. And they are welcoming to ideas. One thing that they have said to us that they're looking for is they've realized that in their community, they need to learn to fundraise from their community. Because for them, they're finding that gone are the days of people just dropping money in the box, right? So what does an annual appeal look like? How do they solicit the community members? So we'll be working with them. So I think, for those of you who want to build a relationship with that community, you're welcome to join us as an AFP kind of initiative with them. But we'll be working with them quite a bit over probably the next year or so, just kind of partnering with them and getting to know them and them getting to know us as fundraisers. But they were super nice. It was a really great afternoon that we had there.
That's really exciting, and definitely encourage that. Just so I get a sense of like other people in the group here today, like what types of organizations are you part of? So if anybody wants to share.
Well, I work at a big disability nonprofit here in Pittsburgh. And obviously the types of disabilities we support go across all parts of society. It's not just one specific area. So,
so there's a national organization called Muhsen, MUHSEN, and they help a lot of Muslim families with disabilities. And they also work with mosques across the country to get them kind of certified as friendly to in their programming, in their facilities, making sure they have compliance with the state regulations and everything like that. So I would highly encourage you to look into Muhsen.
Thanks, I definitely will. I'm sure at some point, I know we've had somebody at least on our board that's, that's Muslim. We just don't, I'm sure it's just one of those questions you don't always ask, but you probably should.
Sure. Yeah.
It does, faith drives philanthropy for a lot of people. So
definitely.
Yep.
I work for a small social justice nonprofit as their development coordinator. But the idea is to provide housing for minority families. So I think there would be overlap and interest with the Islamic community.
Yeah, definitely. I know locally here, at least, like with Habitat for Humanity, they've done like an interfaith type of build day, and they've also done some other interesting things to engage the Muslim community. They've done stats on how many of their families that they find housing for have been Muslim.
And I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. And they've come and tabled at Friday prayers, obviously, when they were open, but now some mosques are also doing outdoor Friday prayer services and limiting it to, 25, 30 people at a time. But as things start to open up a little bit more, tabling at a Friday service about your organization is another great way to engage. And then to Dave's point as well, trying to get them to self-identify is good. So to your organization's comfort level of creating a survey that kind of collects that information would be useful and helpful as well.
Thank you.
I work for a school, a private school, that serves children from 8 weeks through 6th grade, and a pretty significant portion of our enrollment is from Muslim families, varying degrees of engagement with the school, varying degrees of commitment to their faith. But this has been tremendous because it's an overgeneralization to say that families that are married or intermarried with an American, I'm not saying that quite correctly, but they have been more understanding, I think, with the education about giving to a private school has been more successful from a fundraising point of view. So this actually was enormously helpful in answering the question, why do we give, or why should we give? So thank you. I thought it was amazing, just amazingly helpful presentation. Thank you.
So I work for an adult literacy program. So we do like GED classes, and we do English as a second language. And I know we have overlap with the Muslim community as far as students, but that is not something we ask. You know, we're required to use pretty much a governmental intake form when we bring in adult students.
Sure.
And that question's not there, right? Faith is not on there or background. So we have talked about doing, you know, separate surveys once students are involved and put in classrooms to do other surveys to learn more about them so we can dig deeper. But I'm pretty sure we must have overlap.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in and share before we go about
Hi. Hi, this is Pat Winter. I work at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and our library has many partnerships. I, on a professional level, don't have one specifically with the Muslim community, but the library staff I know do. And then on a personal note, I live out in a suburb of Pittsburgh, and I know my church is active in a ministerium with the local Muslim mosques, and have been working on community development and have been very active after some of the very distressing things we've seen in our nation in recent years. So I think the relationships are extremely important to have at all times, but also when we need to come together.
Yeah. One of the good examples I've seen some communities do is have their city councils do like a Muslim Appreciation Month. And that's been a really great way of showing some solidarity. One of the things that I would recommend for your library is maybe highlighting Muslim authors. There's a variety of like children's books to teen novels to everything in between. And you can try to highlight some Muslim authors at a given time of the year, maybe in Ramadan or others that might be more appropriate. But I think that would be something really cool to make sure that you're getting a diverse readership as well.
Thank you.
That's a great idea. Okay. Well, if there are not any more comments or questions, we can let Muhi get back to his afternoon, and we can all get back to our afternoon. Is there any last minute questions before we sign off? Well, thank you so much, Muhi. This has been
Wonderful.
Wonderful. We hope to invite you back for at least another Zoom session with you on some other, maybe on some other topic.
Sure.
Invitation to return to Pittsburgh still
Yes.
is there. You know, some of you know that Muhi was going to join us live and in person in April, but clearly, right, we know that didn't happen. So the invitation to visit us in Pittsburgh is still there. We'd love to have you. And I know we'll be connecting you with our local Islamic Center. I know they want to chat with you and get to know you a little bit, to help them out a little bit. So thank you again so much for being here. To all of our attendees today, thank you. Please pay attention to your emails. Check out our new website. There'll be some fun things planned for July and August, and we'll be kicking off programming again in September. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Pleasure was mine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Muhi.
Bye.
Bye.